Hi, are we live? Yes, amazing. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Polkadot brand update. To give the entire community an update of where we are and what's coming. We here are the Bounty Curators and the Bounty Implementers. Just gonna go a quick around. We have Katie here. She's amazing, doing lots of cool stuff over at Moonbeam. We have Iggy over here, who's doing amazing design work and a lot of stuff related to Polkadot. And we've got Koto over there in their amazing pink lit up office, which is super dope. Who are
Mhm.
obviously the Bounty implementers. And myself, my name is Kaye, and I'm also a Bounty curator on this project. And obviously, we're all very much looking forward to giving you all an update. So, for those who may not have already seen, there is indeed actually a website that has just been put on live. So I'm going to share a screen and give everyone a quick update of what is already live right now. And you should be seeing the screen at the moment. So please go ahead and visit vote.polkadot.network, and you will see the actual next milestone of this kind of historic project that we've got. And I think it would be a really, really great read for all those who've been following this project ever since it first started, which is back in the 4th of January 2021, essentially at the beginning of this year, when the first ever bounty on chain was approved by Polkadot Council to essentially evolve the Polkadot brand to essentially address the challenges and opportunities that it sees itself facing, towards the future as this kind of ecosystem network expands. And so this is obviously a very experimental process. I mean, this is the first time ever in history where blockchain technology through on-chain governance is powering the ability for folks to work together on a decentralized brand, right? To be coordinating that and pushing that forward in stewardship for the entire community. And so this is definitely a really awesome and historic moment. And there's a lot of kind of background information explained on the website for those who haven't been following along since all of the hard work that's been put into this project since January. We obviously like to explain, what it's all about and why is it important. And I won't spend too much time, obviously, verbalizing too much of what has already been written because we obviously encourage you all to take the time to actually read over those things. And there's also a portion that actually explains the entire roadmap here, where you can click these links and see, the on-chain proposal, the actual docs, and the report that was actually written to summarize the research and an immersion playback deck. These are kind of amazing. And it's definitely a little bit of a long read, right? The immersion playback deck is like 81 slides of all of the research that was taken from the community and surfacing that all together to bringing that into one kind of like synthesized report. And of course, the bounty close report speaks a lot about, that playback deck as well as and showing the highlights and even giving a little bit of a meta behind the scenes, I suppose, update on what the process was actually like to actually run this bounty. Now, what you'll actually find to be really exciting is that this is actually the next phase of the project, which is an on-chain vote. So what does that mean? That means that every single dot holder who holds a token for the Polkadot network can actually cast a vote on how they believe the Polkadot network's brand should actually evolve into the future. And the voting process here has been outlined, and essentially it's a very simple process where you can use a remark transaction to be signed. That gets sent onto the network and is recorded forever. And all of the votes from the entire Polkadot community is collected, obviously transparently. It's all publicly open on the ledger, of course, and it's calculated in towards to understand what is the final feedback in the general direction of where we would like to go. And so one important factor is actually that the vote is going to be quadratic. So what that means is that the vote takes into account how much balance an account is holding, and that weights how much impact that vote actually has on the ultimate outcome. But quadratic voting means that that voting power ends up being scaled towards in favor for smaller accounts. And essentially, this means that smaller fishes get a lot more benefit than big whales. And so, for example, one dot in a balance will actually equal a voting power of one. 25 dot actually equals a voting power of 5, and 100 dot has a voting power of 10, right? So essentially the square root of the balance becomes the actual voting power. And so we believe this is a great way to encourage participation from all different types of folks across the ecosystem, because it is, of course, the collective that makes Polkadot super great and for what it is. And so what is actually being voted on? At the end of the day, a brand is a very amorphous and multifaceted thing. There's many components to it, and it's really hard to say that we're meant to be voting on individual components. Are we voting on colors or typefaces and doing everything individually? And it doesn't really make that much sense to break everything down to its constituent components and then try to kind of like piece it all together at the end. And that wouldn't obviously lead to the best results. And so there is a lot of thinking here that explains, why is the identity being updated, and why certainly is the logo being updated. And this is then manifested towards 4 videos that y'all can watch. And so there's 2 videos for identity, and this explores 2 different brand directions that can be taken for the Polkadot brand. And obviously they have different flavors, different focuses, and different ways that it builds a language for folks to be communicating things inside the Polkadot ecosystem. And both of these are obviously different, but at the same time, there is a level of synergy. And there might be some levels of similarity within those identities, but I think that that's purposeful, because at the end of the day, if something is truly within the essence of the Polkadot network, and it represents the desires that have been seen and showcased inside the community research, for example, making sure that pink is still a strong component of the brand, making sure that dots themselves and circles and those types of things are a strong component of the brand, then of course there's going to be some levels of similarity. And the second thing as well, there's going to be an update to the Polkadot logo. And so this is something that's obviously always going to come with contention throughout the community, because most people obviously have grown to love the Polkadot brand and the logo that currently exists. However, there are actual tangible problems that exist with the current Polkadot logo. And it is explained on the webpage, but just to vocalize some of them right now is that for a lot of new folks, the Polkadot P that you see to come to represent the token, certainly on UIs, and certainly when you see on the Polkadot Twitter and the websites and so forth, lots of people mix that up to be with Pinterest. And for those who are maybe not familiar with Pinterest, I obviously encourage you all to quickly Google Pinterest and have a look at their logo design, and you'll see that it indeed it causes a lot of mix up. And of course, there's been a lot of community debate on that on Reddit, on Twitter, and so forth. And so it is, of course, a bit of an issue at the moment. And on top of that, if the P needs to evolve, we need to imagine what can the possibilities also exist when it comes to localizing the Polkadot logo into different languages and exploring that type of avenue. And on top of that, potential token designs. Now, very importantly, none of the things that you see today are final. It's not meant to be final at all. This is meant to be a dialogue. It's a very experimental process. This is not something that's ever been done before. So there's a lot of learnings that come with this. So this is really meant to be presenting directions and possible avenues that go forward. And this vote and the feedback received from the community is obviously going to take these things into further refinement, into further different directions, in order to obviously make sure that these are obviously meeting the needs of the community, the network. So again, just to emphasize this point, nothing that you see in these videos are final, and very much so the vote and the feedback that is received is going to be of influence to how this becomes iterated on beyond this stage of the project. So this is why videos was used instead of rather showing static images, because the point isn't really to be breaking down individual constituents and saying, oh, I don't like this color or like this thing. They're really meant to just give a general idea, a picture of a direction or a route or a territory that something can move towards, and things will be further refined over time. And obviously, fully refining something and building it out completely to the point where it is the final asset, and then showing that to for a community vote would not make so much sense. So definitely bringing things on earlier onto the process is of the best benefit here. So there's definitely an FAQ down the bottom as well, and we recommend for y'all to read through that. It helps to explain how the voting process works. There's even a video there to also walk through the voting process if you want to do things on chain. There's the brand feedback form here as shown on the website, and there's 2 sections to the FAQ. There's the brand vote here, where you can learn about lots of different types of questions that you might have that are frequently asked. And then there's another tab that switches over to brand development, which talks a lot more about the process behind the Polkadot brand update bounty. And also, that's the point of this crowdcast in itself, to actually talk about that and kind of explain to the process and be as transparent as possible. And we think that this is obviously in the spirit of the Polkadot network. And again, this roadmap already has outlined multiple stages that has been publicly shared in the past, and every single stage of this process has been documented and put back to the community to make sure that this is being stewarded in the best possible way. So I think that's a great enough introduction. And so the rest of the format of this call we're going to jump into a bit of a panel discussion between the bounty curators as well as the bounty implementers Koto, and we're just going to talk through the 3 different topics, and then afterwards we want to obviously spend a lot of time on the Q&A with the entire community. So there's an ask your question box down the bottom. Definitely throw your questions in there as they come up, and people can upload those questions and we can answer them. Just as a pre-note, we will not be answering any questions that relate to prices, token, finances, talking about other protocols or any of that type of topics. We want to make sure that this conversation is very much focused on the Polkadot brand, this decentralized branding process, and a lot of those types of topics. So we may skip over any of those questions that are not really on topic. So with that, shall we begin, y'all? What do you think?
Sure, let's do it. I can kick things off here with the first question. So we've drafted just a couple in advance since there's a few to anticipate here. The first thing that makes sense to touch on is there was a pretty exhaustive community outreach effort, as well as getting input from all sorts of stakeholders within the Polkadot community. Let's talk about some interesting findings that came out of that. What was interesting in this research process when talking to the Polkadot community?
Cool. I think first thing to, personally, at least for me, was the kind of excited by how engaged and kind of active everyone was. Again, like not just in terms of the community and the technology, but also the brand. Everyone has kind of different opinions on what they liked and what they disliked, and getting a well-rounded kind of formalized sense of opinions from everyone was really kind of interesting. Also, the kind of variety of people we spoke to as well. All corners of the globe, different nationalities, hopes, potential opinions on the kind of direction. Very few answers were the same, which is a kind of really fun and interesting challenge and opportunity, I think.
Yeah, it was also interesting thinking about what it's comparable to, because as we delve deeper, looking at things like Discord, Twitter, and where kind of the ecosystem kind of lives, we started to think about like what kind of parallels can we draw in terms of brands that are kind of decentralized, as we knew that we needed to be a part of it. So we went everywhere from punk to thinking of like how countries are run, but I think there wasn't anything that was like directly kind of a good analogy for it. So it was really interesting just to delve into those and think about how we could approach a brand with those kind of perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
I think it's worth mentioning too, there's a lot to like about the Polkadot brand, and even in the comments, I've seen a lot of people whose first reaction is we like it the way it is, and that's certainly something that came through very clear in the community discussions at the outset of this project. There's some practical problems that need to be solved, which is really what this whole exercise is based on. But this research project, I think, did a really good job identifying what exactly it is about the Polkadot brand, both for engineers as well as kind of the broader community, what it is that they like about it and what we want to keep. And those were some pretty important insights to have at the beginning of the project.
Totally. I think that really helped guide when we get into maybe talking about what we created a little bit more, but like guiding, understanding what are the strong elements that would tie everything together. Really kind of fun.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, I know some folks are talking about the beanie, the expect chaos. Well, you'd have to look out in the future for future swag opportunities that might arise. And definitely there'll be a lot of exciting swag coming from the Polkadot side as well. I just want to have a quick note. I forgot to mention that Bette is not able to make, she's also a bounty curator of this project, but she's not able to actually make the call because she's based in New Zealand time, and it's something ridiculously early in the morning at the moment. So lots of folks all around the world, thank you for joining, but I just want to quickly call that out as I realized I just forgot that.
Yeah, I think we've already touched on it a little bit, but as Katie mentioned, but what were kind of the important challenges and opportunities that I guess we identified at the beginning with the creative briefs that we needed to tackle?
I would say that possibly the one that we mentioned before, kind of the biggest challenge is that a lot of people were very vocal, or they really like what they have. So I think our mission was to kind of keep loyal to the original design, keeping the brand equity, but also at the same time evolving the brand towards something more usable and thinking about how to scale it in time. I would say also another, I don't know, maybe you agree or not, but accessibility was something that we also wonder a lot, like how accessible this brand is for the community. Something like how the community is going to use it, what tools are they going to use when they work with the brand, what circumstances they're going to use the brand. So accessibility for me would be something I would highlight, definitely.
I know, I'll just chime in quickly, Tim. From my perspective, I think the biggest thing for me was to really understand what we're trying to accomplish from a community perspective again, because this is, I think we all have, at least the folks on this call, we all have brand experience from the Web 2 space where you're a company and the company owns the brand and the company gets to say what that brand can or cannot be used for. And that is very much not the exercise that we undertook, right? This is something that not only is not owned by anyone, but is intentionally meant to be remixed and extended and to flex as different projects evolve in the ecosystem. And there should be some, guardrails in place in terms of fraudulent projects misusing those brand marks, but it needs to be flexible enough to accommodate those scenarios. And I think that was a really huge issue as we were trying to, evolve through these conversations to make sure that no matter what decisions were being made or what proposals were put forth, that they were broad and flexible enough so that, when it's kind of pushed off into the community, once it is finalized, that it has enough flexibility to grow and evolve and shape with the community over time.
Yeah, I think that sense of giving everyone ownership and what people need to be able to own to kind of be successful and building on Polkadot or being an ambassador or like just participating in the community, understanding what the brand actually plays a role in their kind of like how they can participate. And I think that was like, take this point around accessibility, it's like how are we making sure that like it's usable for everyone.
I think as well, like, a lot of folks don't even recognize what the current Polkadot brand was. And it was very interesting, I think, when Koto went about and actually doing a bit of an audit around all the touch points that exist in the Polkadot ecosystem. And I would definitely recommend folks to check out that immersion playback deck. And they kind of bring all those assets together and then put it all on the same page. And you start to realize, is this actually some sort of cohesive experience that people can recognize? And you look at the current Polkadot.network website, that was built and designed when Polkadot was much simpler. There was no concept of common good parachains. There was a lot of these types of concepts that didn't exist as the technology evolved. And there were very practical constraints with having a design language that was too simple, that it didn't allow to express complex things in a simplified way. And I think that what was really cool about this is that there's an opportunity for, I think the analogy is to not build brand books and rule books that, as Katie mentioned, which is typical of the centralized branding approach, but how do we actually build tools that the community can then use, and whatever gets adopted as a tool becomes the brand, right? And that's really a much more community-driven and a network-driven type of approach, rather than the traditional rule books and guidelines and all those types of things, which things are traditionally kind of run by, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, there was definitely, going back to your thing about the snapshot of the community, when we did have that slide with seeing everything from memes to, events like Decoded, which are much more polished, there was definitely like some like disparity between it. But I think there was definitely an attitude coming through as well, and kind of a sense of personality, especially from like the conversations we had with different people and the kind of surveys we ran. There was like a feeling that was coming through, and I think it was like, how do we capture and embody that, but then obviously let people take ownership of it.
I have a question for Koto. Thinking like comparing this, what we're trying to do here, basically experimenting on different ways to do brands, comparing with more of a traditional way to do it. How was the process from your point of view, and how from the research to the directions presented? How was it like?
I think from everyone it's very different, obviously, but I think what was most interesting was how critical we all were of the process, and just like thinking, are we approaching this the right way? Are we thinking about it? Are we like, what else could we do? And I think that gave us a lot broader remit to kind of experiment and push things in different directions, because we weren't working to like this rigid time plan where we had to kind of deliver everything within 4 weeks, and it needed to tick all these boxes. It was much more kind of expansive, and yeah, I think it just allowed us to really think about the role brand plays for a community rather than an organization.
I thought what was really cool about this process. I mean, as Katie mentioned, all of us here have rebranded and branded many projects and launched many brands. Koto obviously as a company doing that as a business, and for a lot of us, working inside companies. And what I thought was kind of the coolest was having folks like Bette and Kaye and Iggy and Koto and all these people as equal stakeholders in working on this process, but then not kind of losing the kind of I guess power of like the project, because when you have a lot of people in the room, you can be designed by committee, right? It's like, oh, Katie says this, and then Iggy says that, and then Koto says this, and Bette says that, and they're like, oh, like how do you manage all of that? But I actually thought that what enabled the project to progress and not really get stalled, as some projects do for years, for those who've never been on brand project. There are some brands that try to go for 3-4 years and they can never do it because it never gets pushed through. And I think what actually led to that being done quite well is that the Polkadot community's essence was much stronger and much more clearer in values than a lot of other protocols and projects out there. And it's very distinct. And I think there's a cool, even color wheel that Koto put together, where like all the blockchain brands are just like blue and green. And then like there's just like Polkadot and a few others, like Kusama and stuff, like on the other side of the spectrum. And I think that identity really spoke a lot of volumes in helping sure that the Polkadot community's kind of energy kept pushing this project forward, which was super cool, which is very different from a regular branding project, which you just have to have like meetings with stakeholders and bosses, pushing that project forward, which is a different type of propulsion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that came through, which was really interesting, I think like a lot of times you have to define values for companies, and kind of you end up like trying to differentiate them from the kind of competitors or something, whereas the technology with Polkadot is really what defines the values and the kind of what you can and can't do. And I think it's a really interesting, like it kind of guided us in terms of like what the kind of the whole governance system and everything makes it super interesting.
And just to talk about this process a little bit more, I'm not 100% sure that everyone knows really what goes into branding. It feels second nature to us, but most folks see a logo and they see some designs, and that kind of encapsulates what an end user sees from a branding perspective, but there's a lot more that goes into it. So obviously as a curator, all we were trying to do is kind of give feedback and shape it and give our recommendations for other places to explore, things that we thought worked or didn't work. But ultimately, our role wasn't to say yes or no to anything. It was just to use our expertise to say, I think these things could work, and they do or do not solve the problems that we're seeking to solve right now. That was kind of the extent of what we did. And so the output that we have today in front of us is really two different creative designs, right? There's creative, I would say, directions. And so they're not polished, they're not final. Neither the logo nor these kinds of videos with I want to say like a brand like feeling or reason to be kind of thing. And so let's talk a little bit more about why that is. Like, why did we share in rough draft form with the community and give them an opportunity to vote, rather than waiting until the end and presenting what Parity or Web3 or any of the curators thought might have been the best option?
Yeah, I think going back to what you were talking about at the beginning and what like makes brands, there are like certain pillars, like I think we've touched on like logo, typography, color, tone of voice, and kind of messaging, illustration, art direction. All of those things kind of are kind of what starts to define a brand. But then when you put them together and you kind of put a system around them, is kind of normally how you create like, the guidelines and everything else that kind of sits around it. And I think with Polkadot, it's not really about those kind of guidelines and those like rigid ways of putting things together and kind of creating consistency. It's understanding that the community need these things, and it's understanding that they can use them in different ways. So it's really about kind of, I guess what we're trying to do with the videos is show possibilities, and the kind of possibilities, if we start with these elements, these are the kind of things that we can start to create. If we create these kind of tools, we can start to do these kind of things. So it was really about just kind of imagining what would be possible with these elements, and then I guess it's going to be down to the community to take them on and then like develop and create things from them.
I have another question for Koto. Why 2 options? Since the beginning, we thought that composability was something like quite recurrent in our talks. I think will be interesting to think like why the final composition, right? Why 2 directions of logo tokens and then 2 directions of identities?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we started off very wide, as you remember, I'm sure. We did go wider in 2 directions for everyone who's listening. It's like, we did experiment a lot, and some stuff completely failed, kind of missed the tone or missed what it needed to do in terms of usability, might have been too complex. So it was really about kind of balancing all the needs and the things that were discovered in the immersion that the brand wasn't working for the brand at the moment, and then also thinking about the future. And this is something that needs to be able to grow organically, and it's not going to be, this is it, and these are the set things. It's going to kind of start to change over a number of years. And I think that's why we kind of ended up at 2 options. We kind of filtered down the things that didn't work, and we got to a point where I think everyone agreed that the 2 routes that we were left with answered all of those needs, and would have that kind of that stretch for the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, so you know, at the end of the day, I think what should be given as an option should be something that actually resolves the problem that the community kind of surfaced through that research, right? It's not no point oh, let's have 20 different options, and yeah, let's just go through all of them, and then propose something that actually doesn't even resolve what the community wants or needs, which would be very problematic. So I think that process indeed of diverging and all those different territories that Koto explored was really, really interesting. But I think when stewarding the project, I think things always kind of went back to the same thing, right? Making sure that it was easy to use, that the community could actually find it accessible, rather than this thing that only professional designers could interact with. And that was, I think, a really kind of key part of that process. So I think that leads to my kind of question, how were kind of the insights and input of the community kind of incorporated into your design decisions when you were kind of exploring different territories? What was that kind of any interesting stories that came out from that?
Yeah, I think there were some really kind of obvious things. Obviously, there were discussions around the logo, people's reactions to it, and generally it was really positive. And I think when you look at Polkadot in the kind of ecosystem of other blockchain brands, it stands out. It feels really different, like the existing kind of word mark. So we knew that there was something that needed to be retained there. It was understanding where that kind of equity lied, that kind of handwritten feel felt very different to where everyone else was headed. And the same thing with color and dots. They were obvious things, and there were things that we needed to think about, with how we incorporate dots, because other people use circles. It's really about kind of how do we create that sense of ownership for Polkadot and move that forward. There were also things that I think tonally we heard within the interviews that really resonated, and that made its way into some of the messaging you'll see within the roots, things that really kind of set the tone for the future of what Polkadot is looking to achieve. And I think most of that came from things we'd heard, and we've kind of just distilled it down. So I think that was really interesting for us.
I'd add as well something that is unique to blockchain, to decentralized ecosystems, is this kind of technologist and also token holder split in the community. Not that they're necessarily different, but they are kind of different personas when you think about things from that perspective. And so I do know that was kind of a frequent talk track throughout this process, right? Is, how might we approach this in order to make it identifiable and distinct and separate and really feel like its own community for everyone. But then also looking at technologists, particularly engineers, who don't always have kind of the way they don't look at brands the same way. A lot of it is logo centric or color centric in some cases. How do we also accommodate the needs and the demands of that audience? So I think that split, again, is not unique necessarily to Polkadot relative to other crypto projects, but it is somewhat unique when looking at other things that we might have tackled in a more centralized ecosystem.
I think with you touched on an interesting subject there, where we're dealing with this idea of brand, and we've answered a lot of questions about why we've made brand decisions and the sorts of assets that we've helped develop. From your perspective, how do you think that these brand designs and these assets will ultimately help the wider Polkadot community?
I almost feel like everyone probably regrets letting me be involved because I was very vocal about this piece throughout the whole process, right? There's a lot of needs from the community. And so, yes, what you guys see today, what you see in these videos is very much encapsulating, I think, what will be the spirit of this redesign. But what you need to keep in mind is the end result will likely have pieces of the Polkadot branding that you know and love today, pieces from this kind of exploration that the Koto team has just done, pieces that are net new. And so what I hope to see from it is, clear ways that as a community project like Moonbeam, we can use Polkadot assets in our marketing. How are we supposed to use them? To what degree should our logo tie into the Polkadot logo? It's not an accident that Moonbeam has a very similar shade of pink as a secondary color to the original Polkadot logo. And so with those sorts of things in mind, how do community projects use these assets correctly? And then more importantly, let's get some assets that are consistent, that describe things that people constantly want to see and understand. Things like right now, we're of course dealing with crowd loans, but I think even more broadly, we have concepts like parachains, we have concepts like parathreads and collators and validators and all of these different roles within the ecosystem. And there's no real unified graphic approach to this. And so while that stuff may come later, it's very much going to be tied to this project. And I think everyone will benefit when we have more materials like that have kind of a consistent feel and voice and approach from an explanatory perspective.
Yeah, I definitely agree with this. I think growing this visual language for the ecosystem itself is going to be kind of the next challenge, and not only for Polkadot, but for everybody involved. So, yes, definitely.
Yeah, and I think also it's the coolest thing is when something is taken and then used in ways that was never thought to be used, and things that and as a good example, I think for folks who are familiar in the Polkadot ecosystem, there's this relay chain kind of diagram that gets used, and there's this parachain I guess components of like icon design, and when that was designed originally, it was just some diagram, and it was going to have some random use case, nothing particularly flashy important. And years later, it suddenly becomes this visualization that is adopted widely across the entire ecosystem. Lots of parachain projects use that in their illustrations. When they're doing education things, it's also used to represent parachains. And I think that's the coolest thing, where it's like the adoption by the ecosystem of what design speaks to them actually becomes the brand, because it's those things that get used and put out into the world that become the touch point. That is what people experience and becomes the brand. It's not what is on one website or is on one brand book or one thing. And I think that's also a big reason why these were videos to talk about directions of how things could possibly evolve, and to inspire a certain type of visual language and so forth, rather than saying, hey, it's these three colors and this typeface and so forth, which is a very much more restrictive and limiting type of a way about going about things.
So now that we've sort of put a lot of time into this project, I would say probably the Koto team most of all. What happens now that we've put it up to a vote? What happens next?
Yeah, I think this is a really great question. The simple answer is, when this project began, it wasn't like there were like these 20 defined steps and we knew exactly how it was going to go and it's going to finish by this time. It was very much the opposite of that. It was like trying to course adjust at every single moment to make sure that this is indeed in line in the spirit of the Polkadot community. And depending how the results go, if for example one direction is a clear winner where it has a lot of strong sentiment behind it, or maybe it's like a 41-51 split, I think those will give different types of interpretation for all of us to think about merging that type of on-chain vote with the qualitative feedback that's given through the form, right? What parts of identity A or option B did you like versus others, and how can those things possibly interact more with each other? So definitely there's a brand development process that needs to happen beyond this, as again we're repeating, These are not final deliverables by any means today. And after that, these things will eventually end up showing up in the world and being updated across various types of assets. So I think that's at least my perspective. I don't know what y'all think should happen after this.
Yeah, it's definitely, this is the learning process. So this is hearing back from the community in terms of what like the reaction to everything is. And then I think making sure that what's delivered beyond this and developed is really tangible, so that it's really useful, and we're delivering the right kind of assets at the end of it, I guess.
Yeah, I think something very cool about the mechanism that we're using is that we're looking for a qualitative outcome. So we introduce the conviction. So basically, you can vote how much you like certain option or not, right? And it's going to be like pretty cool to see all the results and interpret all this data. Yeah, that's going to be very interesting. Yeah, I see a lot of questions in the chat talking about the options. So I'm going to just ask, like, how would we define the two identities and the two logos? Like, how do they differentiate each other, and how do they position maybe?
So we, as we've mentioned a few times, part of the research phase, which we label as the immersion phase, it became very apparent, especially when we think about the logo to begin with. There was a lot of equity in that needed to be retained, and we've talked about that quite a bit already. And so keeping the personality of that is really important moving forwards. And that has been simplified, and we've rectified some of the issues, like Kaye mentioned. There's the issue with P, and there was lots of other typographic details that we went into. That word mark itself, so the actual name Polkadot, it's the same across both logo options. We have a different token that sits next to it. One of the tokens, token A, references the idea in an abstract way of a relay chain and represents that. And then we have a second option, the token B, and that is more about this idea of the technology that underpins Polkadot and this idea of layer zero and the ability to build upon Polkadot acting as this layer zero technology. In terms of the actual directions themselves, we have the two options. The first one very much focuses on this idea of the dot. The dot is integral to the idea of Polkadot. It's in the name. There's a lot of visual equity in that, in the existing identity. And for that direction, it's very much taking this idea of the dot, making it feel super iconic. What behaviors can we imbue it with so it feels like it has even more legs to play with and be used by the wider community across any number of different communications and channels and different types of messages that need to be communicated depending on your particular needs or the particular needs of the application. Then with the second, slightly different approach, the visual language B, that is all about capturing the energy of the community. You still harness the power of a dot, but it's not used in such a singular manner. It's much more about the collection of dots representing this collection of people, which represents in turn the community itself. And so you give it this sense of living, breathing energy, and it's allowed to collect and move and have different behaviors as well, but in a very different manner. And there's slightly different treatments for typography amongst both of the visual language directions as well as differences between the use of color.
Yeah, there's some nice details like that we've developed throughout the process. Like each route has a bespoke kind of typeface, which again is work in progress, but something that would again be owned by Polkadot and kind of drive that consistency and uniqueness across all the kind of communications. And as you see in the videos, there's different approaches to how we use pink and how it appears in different ways, and the different weightings of it as well. So
it's also worth noting with the visual elements. So with the logo, work has been done to make that more appropriate across different markets as well, and different sort of languages. So different language versions of the actual typography of the word mark have been developed as well, and that will be continued to be built upon as the project continues.
Yeah, that was something we discussed as like a really interesting idea, and I think we've touched on it with kind of simplified Chinese and Cyrillic, but obviously that idea could expand dramatically and touch every kind of script that we might need it to.
I think something else to touch on as well. So there's a lot to consider in these kind of visual presentations that Koto put together. There's these, visual elements. There's kind of the brand spirit that you can see through the messaging and the words that are present in each video. So there's kind of a lot of components, which is why there's this feedback form that Kaye mentioned. But one of the things that I really liked is there's kind of two different pieces that are both true of the Polkadot ecosystem. One is this kind of like where, I don't want to say the word anarchist, but there's like almost that kind of thread of like, we're going to just do what needs to be done mentality a little bit. And I feel like, the visual A really represents that. Whereas visual B, what I liked about it was this component of, I keep using it as a school of fish kind of thing. Whereas other ecosystems have like some big figurehead and everyone does what the figurehead says. I think Gavin's approach is a lot different, and it's much more kind of behind the scenes, and we're kind of all, flexibly moving with him, but not tied to what is like the edict from above. And so some of that kind of element I can see woven into both, but there's really just a lot to consider, and it really depends on what you're looking for when you're looking at it and how many times you see it, honestly, because I think my first viewing, I had different reactions in subsequent viewings. So it's worth just looking at them quickly. And then again, keeping in mind the problems we're trying to solve, which are very real. I know I love the Polkadot logo, but it does look like a Pinterest P, and it's really hard to brand a circle. It just is. And so there's just some really real components that need to be solved for. And, I just ask everyone to keep that in mind as they're going through these, that their approaches, their recommendations from Koto for different things we can do to kind of resolve some of these, but that path is very much still open. And I think everyone hopefully can see being involved at this stage is a really great time to give feedback and to help shape what the next steps become.
I think that's such a funny point. A bit of like going back and forward on like, the ways that the Pinterest P design of the Polkadot, it gets resolved. We did all explore just using a pink dot for a very long time and just seeing if that would work. But as folks would realize, it's incredibly difficult just to use a pink dot in different UIs and in different ways it shows up. And there's all sorts of issues of using a graphical element as simple as a pink dot as something to represent a network. And so I think let's go straight into some of the community questions that we have. And we have a lot already. And I think that we'll try to make our way through them. And I think the first one that's most upvoted is already kind of speaking to this topic that we're talking about, which is like, why do we actually need to rebrand it all? And so firstly, I think we shouldn't say rebrand. Polkadot's brand's not changing from like, X to suddenly, 10,000 or something like that. It's really an update. It's an evolution. And a lot of that stuff is already explained on vote.polkadot.network, and some of the points we've already brought up, very tangible ones like the token design having kind of visualization issues with other very popular mainstream brands and other aspects. But I'll address one that's in the chat right now, which is that a lot of folks say Polkadot.js needs to be redesigned. Well, there's a fundamental brand question. How do you redesign Polkadot.js to be a much more user-friendly interface? Well, you actually need to have a consistent UI design language that can simplify and speak about things that are technological in order to actually build a better UI. And a lot of those things actually today, they don't actually exist. And because they don't exist, they need to be explored and pushed. And that's really what this project is about. It's the foundation. It's not something that you can immediately see and say, oh, that solved that problem. It's something that really gives benefit to a lot of different things. And that's at least my perspective of one thing that we can see as a reason for why this is a very needed process. But certainly, I encourage everyone to check out the website and read a lot more details behind the scenes. Does anyone else have something you want to add to this first question that we have?
Yeah, definitely. I think to your point, yeah, I think it's definitely an evolution, and Polkadot's not a static thing. It's going to grow and develop and change. And I think that's what this project is all about, understanding that it needs to grow, develop, and change, and giving the parts to allow it to happen and allow people to take it in different directions. So it's definitely not like we need to get rid of this and start doing this. It's kind of like, what else can we start to do that's really going to strengthen the community and make it an organic growing thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll go to the next question. Have you considered renaming to .emac.face? Who wants to take that?
it wasn't something that came up in discussion. We talked about floating on Boatface as something that maybe failed in terms of community engagement, but yeah, definitely could see some merchandise or something with that on it. But,
I would just say this kind of underscores the whole point of Curators, right? And the whole point of approaching it this way, which is, yes, community feedback is super important. Tons of research went in at the beginning in terms of all sorts of stakeholders across the ecosystem. And now, obviously, is a great checkpoint to involve the community. But as we all know, it can be very dangerous to just open up brand feedback for a really, really broad community, partially because there's trolls, but also partially because like the fan favorite isn't always going to solve for these things that we need to solve for. And so we certainly spoke about a Bodie McBoatface scenario where we had a Dottie McDotface, and I think we've been successful in averting that. But keep that in mind in terms of why you're being presented with a couple different options. It's not that anyone here thinks that they're perfect and ready to go. It's that we want you to be involved in a productive way and hopefully channel that into feedback that can then be used by the Koto team to make changes and figure out how to best integrate these new recommendations into the brand that you guys already know and love.
Cool. The next question, which relates to social media marketing, as mentioned, like we don't want to talk on the topic of marketing because that's really separate from what this event is meant to be about. And on top of that, I'll just make the point, like, it's not like these things are mutually exclusive. It's not like, oh, because we're working collectively with the community on the brand, therefore nothing happens on social media. All of these things can be worked on at the same time, and the ecosystem is very large, and everyone's obviously open and it's a permissionless thing to participate in. So certainly, as curators and as the bounty implementers, we encourage you to create a bounty proposal and propose it on chain and do what you would love to do. But we won't be discussing marketing matters in this call because it's a little bit out of scope. Stake your freedom. Yes, okay, we're getting a lot of feedback that stake your freedom is not a thing that the community is resonating with. Fantastic. That's why we do this. That's why we put things out there before they get pushed out, because feedback is super important and getting that input. I would encourage folks to throw this into the form. There is a form on the vote.polkadot.network website that you can use, and all of those things will be taken into consideration by Koto and the curators as we kind of push this project forward. Where do you see the Polkadot ecosystem in 1 to 3 and 10 years? I think we can take this maybe from a brand standpoint as a question rather than a general one. Who'd like to address this one? Kaye, do you want to take this one maybe?
Sure. Well, so I think the biggest thing is that, Polkadot probably won't have, 4 curators deciding what is or is not the Polkadot brand in the future in many ways. It will be very truly a community brand. And I think there's a lot of extensions of that, right? There's we've talked about diagrams, we've talked about the logo itself, we've talked about color schemes and mottos and things like that. But what the brand becomes, I always use the representation of how other people describe you. And so I think that what we heard at the beginning of this exercise was pretty disparate, right? We heard a lot of different descriptions of what exactly Polkadot was. And I don't think we'll ever unite that. It's going to be too diverse an ecosystem. But what I would love to see, and I'd love to hear, are people championing what we think are kind of the best things about Polkadot when they talk about the Polkadot brand. And that's kind of how I'd measure it, which seems a little bit amorphous, but I think that's really the only way to kind of describe what a brand would be in some long-term period of time, because it will, in my mind, only become more and more decentralized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing I would like to see in the future, obviously, is more brands and more communities and more everything within the Polkadot, right? We're kind of the first, and we are trying to figure out how all of this works and what synergies become. But in the future, definitely, the community of communities, it's going to expand, it's just going to grow, and other teams can do other processes within the governance process. So definitely it's going to get interesting.
Yeah, as the ecosystem expands and grows, it only becomes more and more decentralized, right? And that decentralization is a spectrum. And I think in 1, 3, 10 years, it's only just going to become much more participatory. We hope actually on a meta level that this bounty inspires folks to again to propose their own bounties and work on their own things and create their own design tools that other folks in the ecosystem use. At the end of the day, I just really emphasize the point: what becomes the Polkadot brand in 5-10 years is whatever is adopted. It's whatever folks decide to use and they resonate with. You can't force something on a decentralized community that they don't want to adopt. So I think that that's the most beautiful thing about this process. It's not like a centralized company coming down saying this is what we have to do and take it or leave it, like you like it or not. And that's very much the opposite of what's happening here. Cool. Let's go into some of the next questions. We have metaverse question. Okay, with all the new awareness of the concept of metaverse, does it make sense to incorporate this concept into the direction of the Polkadot brand? I also view Polkadot as an entrance or port of entry into the Web3 verse. Therefore, I like the idea of using the word metaport when describing the Polkadot ecosystem. Very, very interesting. Thank you for your question, Patrick. Very insightful. For those who are not aware of what the metaverse is, it's essentially a digitized world from like virtual reality with 3D objects and how you kind of interact in that space. Who'd like to give a shot at answering this?
I would say that I can see easily how virtual reality and 3D will make a huge effect on crypto space, especially. We can easily identify a trend towards that direction, but I'm not sure how it's going to go. I cannot speak.
Yeah, I think it's making sure that the brand can exist in the metaverse as it is, and I think that's like, I think there's all the things there that can be expanded on and built. So it's I think it's just it'll be interesting to see what is built.
I mean, it's a little bit difficult to describe, but this is where the Polkadot as a layer 0 piece comes into mind or into play for me, which is I think that so much of what will be built on Polkadot will push it to potentially have this metaverse, metaport kind of brand. But that doesn't necessarily mean like that's what's at the heart of Polkadot, right? It's much more about shared security, interoperability, all the reasons we're building in the ecosystem. And so it's like, yes, probably, but I think it's going to be more that the community will have that kind of feel rather than the Polkadot brand specifically, if that makes sense.
Okay, cool. We'll go to the next question, which is great work on the identities. I'm not convinced on any of the logos at the moment, but they do, because they don't have actual dots. Would you consider developing dotted options, especially, for example, if the vote goes 50-50? Oh boy, have we gone through a lot of dotted options. I think that's, Koto, would you all want to kind of talk a little bit about the background of the struggles with dots, I guess?
Yeah, I would say that they both do have dots is something that I think if you watch the videos, I think you can kind of see the genesis of them. I think the struggle with dots is there are lots of dots out there in the world and lots of trademarks around them. So it's understanding our unique take on that and the kind of relationship. What we wanted to do with the token, I guess, is build some like deeper meaning into it. And I think that's why like the story around kind of layer 0 with one token and the relay chain with the other was what we felt like embodied Polkadot, or could be something that we could start to imbue with meaning as it kind of develops and gets adopted. So we definitely did explore lots of dot options, and I think the ones we ended up on felt distinctive and different. And I think that was part of it, is looking at kind of the ecosystem that Polkadot exists within, the broader kind of tokens and logos that exist in there, and making sure that it felt different, bold, compelling, and answered some of the things that we needed to from the creative brief as well.
Yeah, and I think also maybe the blockchain industry historically has gone very literal with a lot of things, and I think that's often led to nodes as circles, and then circles all coming together, and indeed there are many blockchain projects out there that have a lot of circles and dots designs in there, and I think that it would not be of strategic alignment with the needs of the network to have something that looks similar to what already exists out there. And so to Koto's point, like this is a dot to an unorthodox sense, not a literal dot, but certainly exploring how that can be shifted and skewed and put into a different perspective while still bringing that kind of into the fray. And so I think that's a way to look at it. I'm gonna skip some of those marketing based questions. What's your opinion on pineapple on pizza? Okay, well, I think everyone's got a strong opinion on that. We don't want to get into a huge political argument at the moment, but we'll skip straight past that one as well. When will the new logo and identity should go live? There isn't a set date for that. At the end of the day, again, we want to re-emphasize that it is a fluid process. The vote itself lasts for 10 days. Which means that after that, obviously, we would love to collect all the results and have a look. And what's very interesting as well, of course, is that this is all on the blockchain, which means everyone and anyone can actually verify what the votes are, which again is a cool meta level to kind of inspire folks to think about what can we actually do here. But ultimately, should everything go smoothly, brand rollouts typically happen, for those who are not aware, on a very gradual thing. It's not suddenly everything is updated all on the same day and boom, it goes live. It's really something that you update over lots of different touch points as you kind of get to them. Okay, we're just gonna skip through some of these questions. I think I saw a question related to participating in the vote on the chat. There is an FAQ that answers this, but I want to do it verbally just in case folks missed out. Voting for the brand in no way affects your ability to participate in the upcoming crowd loans. That's not something that is affected whatsoever. Essentially, the vote happens in a way where you, as a Polkadot token holder, essentially put a piece of arbitrary data on the chain to say this is what you want to be the direction, and that's essentially called a remark transaction. And the only thing you need to do with that is to have the ability to have liquid 0.002 something dot, like a relatively small amount. And the reason why, obviously, it costs something to put something on chain is because, well, that's how the blockchain works. You have to throw a transaction on chain, and that's the way that it is counted. And also, the reason why this is not an off-chain vote where you just have a survey and you just click on a website is because that doesn't represent people's stake in this network and in this community, right? And so we believe that this process is an interesting way to at least explore things and at a stage one, at the first iteration process of how to get the community involved. So again, there's no impact on your ability to stake or participate in crowd loans or any type of stuff. Your DOC would not be locked whatsoever. It is 100% okay to vote, and it won't have any impact beyond the transaction fee for the remote transaction. Maybe we'll do one last question if we have the time. I can't see too many. A lot of them we've already kind of answered. Okay, yeah. So this is a question. Why is the rebranding a logo that looks almost the same? Again, we want to say that this is not a rebrand in the sense of like we want to change everything and go from X to 10,000, right? Because what was uncovered in the research is that people really love the brand, and there's a lot of parts about it that is really great, and there's parts about it that obviously are not so great. And so the goal was to keep as much of the great things as possible while addressing as many of the challenges as possible at the same time. And so the goal was never from the beginning to make this completely different and change the name or anything like that. And that's actually a great sign. It really shows that the community and the network and the ecosystem has a very strong vision that's remained within its essence. Okay, cool. Do you all have anything to share? Any final notes from anybody else?
No, I just look forward to seeing how the vote plays out. What's voted for?
Yeah, I would encourage anybody to drop some feedback because it's very, very important for the process itself. So all these opinions, all these ideas, please drop it there. Very interesting.
Amazing. Okay, awesome. So thanks everyone for joining and tuning in. We've hit the hour, and really, really appreciate all the engagement and all of the feedback. Again, this is very much an experiment, and the things that y'all see today is not final by any means. And yeah, please participate in however way you wish on-chain vote, and writing some feedback on the forum are really some great options. And yeah, we're looking forward to co-creating this with the community and working together as the curators and as the Ignasi implementers. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Ciao.
Nope.